The alien invasion begins. The sky was clear that morning, and the world went about its usual business. People were waking up, getting ready for work, and schools were buzzing with the sound of children getting ready for the day. No one expected that today would be different. But far above the earth, in the vast expanse of space, something was about to happen that would change everything. At first, it was just a flicker, a strange light in the sky, unnoticed by most. Then that light grew brighter, and people began to look up, puzzled. No one could understand what they were seeing. There was no sound, no warning. Then the first ship appeared, silently descending from the heavens. It was huge, far bigger than anything humans had ever seen before, and it wasn't alone. As the ships continued to appear, hundreds of them, they began to spread across the sky, casting a dark shadow over cities, towns, and villages. People stared up in disbelief, frozen by fear and confusion. The world's leaders scrambled to make sense of it all, trying to contact military forces and sending out orders. But it was too late. The aliens were already here. The first contact wasn't what the world had expected. There was no grand speech, no formal introduction. The alien ships didn't descend to land gently. Instead, they fired. The skies lit up with blinding beams of light, and the cities below were torn apart in an instant. Buildings collapsed, fires raged, and people screamed in panic. The sound of explosions filled the air, drowning out everything else. The aliens didn't care. They had no interest in diplomacy or negotiation. The devastation was immediate and overwhelming. No one understood what had caused the sudden attack. The military tried to retaliate, sending jets and missiles into the sky, but the alien ships were too powerful. They moved with a speed and precision that humans couldn't match. Every missile fired by the humans was easily deflected, and their jets were shot down before they could even get close. The people on Earth were helpless. It was as if the aliens were showing them just how fragile their civilization was. There was no time to process what was happening. The cities burned, the land was torn apart, and chaos spread faster than anyone could keep up with. The governments of the world tried to organize a response, but it was clear that they had no idea how to fight this kind of enemy. As the day passed, the destruction continued. The alien ships didn't stop. They didn't tire. They didn't slow down. The cities that had once been thriving metropolises were now piles of rubble. The alien forces didn't make any demands. They simply destroyed. And with each passing hour, the realization grew stronger. This wasn't an invasion that could be repelled with human technology. This wasn't a battle for land or resources. It was a war for survival. In the midst of the destruction, the resistance was born. Small pockets of military forces and civilians banded together, trying to protect what was left of their world. They tried to come up with a plan, but every attempt seemed to end in failure. Their weapons were no match for the alien technology. Each weapon they fired at the aliens only seemed to bounce off their armor, as if their attackers were impervious to everything the humans had. But in the chaos, something unexpected happened. In a secret underground facility, a team of scientists working on a prototype weapon made a shocking breakthrough. They had been working for years on a new kind of defense, something that might give humanity a fighting chance. It wasn't ready yet, but they didn't have the luxury of time. They had to make it work. They were able to tweak the weapon just enough to make it usable. And then the impossible happened. They created a gun capable of firing 3,000 rounds per minute. This weapon was nothing like anything humanity had ever seen. It wasn't big or fancy, but it had one key feature. It was fast. It was powerful. And it had the potential to do what no other weapon had been able to do: fight back against the aliens. The humans who had created the weapon knew this was their only shot. They didn't know how it would work against the alien ships, but they had no other choice but to try. The weapon was loaded, tested, and ready for use. Now they had to find a way to deploy it before it was too late. As night began to fall and the devastation spread further, The resistance gathered their forces. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed in every way. But there was a glimmer of hope. The new weapon might be their salvation. The humans couldn't match the aliens in terms of technology, but they could surprise them. They could strike when the aliens least expected it. It was their only chance. The humans didn't know if the weapon would be enough. They didn't know if they could stop the aliens or if they would simply be wiped out like everyone else. But they knew one thing for certain. They had to try. And they were about to take the fight to the invaders in a way that would leave the galaxy stunned. The world had descended into chaos. What started as an ordinary day had transformed into an apocalypse. Cities burned in flames, skies filled with smoke and debris, and the human race was scrambling to understand just how to survive. In the midst of all this destruction, humanity's last hope lay in a new untested weapon, an experimental firearm capable of firing 3,000 rounds per minute. It was a long shot, but it was all they had left. In a hidden underground facility, the scientists and engineers who had developed the weapon were working tirelessly to ensure it could be deployed quickly. They knew the alien forces were relentless and could strike anywhere, at any moment. They had to be ready. The weapon, which had been designed to counter the advanced alien technology, was simple in design but immensely powerful in its execution. If it could work, it could be the key to humanity's survival. The human resistance had formed after the initial alien strike, but their attempts to fight back had been futile. Conventional weapons did little against the aliens' advanced shields, and the military's counterattacks only seemed to fuel the invaders' wrath. However, there was something about the new weapon, something that offered a shred of hope. The resistance leaders gathered their forces in secret, knowing that this could be their only chance to stop the alien onslaught. The human military was stretched thin, with most of their resources focused on defensive measures rather than offensive operations. But as long as the weapon was functional, they still had a shot. General Mason, the leader of the resistance, paced back and forth in the command center. His face was drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with determination. He knew the world was watching them now. The fate of humanity rested on this strike. If they failed, there would be no tomorrow. "The weapon is ready," one of the engineers told him, looking at the sleek prototype on the table. "But it's untested. We don't know what kind of damage it will cause against their ships. It could work, or it could backfire. We can't predict the outcome." General Mason nodded grimly. He had known from the start that this was a gamble. But he also knew that they didn't have the luxury of time. Every second that passed meant more destruction, more loss. The aliens were closing in, and humanity was on the brink of extinction. "We have no choice," Mason said. "We'll launch the first strike with everything we've got. We're going to hit them where it hurts." The resistance had chosen a target, a massive alien ship that hovered ominously above one of the largest cities still standing. It had been directing the attacks on the ground, signaling to the other ships and coordinating their strikes. If they could take down that ship, it would not only be a blow to the invaders, but also send a message to the rest of the alien fleet. Humanity wasn't going to roll over and die. The human forces assembled in the darkness, each soldier and civilian fighting for their survival. Their hearts raced, and fear gripped them, but there was something else, something stronger: determination. They had lost everything already. There was no room for fear. The first wave of soldiers armed with the new weapon moved swiftly, slipping through the abandoned streets and ruined buildings. The resistance had kept their plans tightly guarded, knowing the aliens had advanced technology that could track every movement. The last thing they needed was for the invaders to know their intentions. The element of surprise was all they had left. As the resistance team neared their target, they found themselves facing a wall of alien soldiers. These creatures were unlike anything human forces had encountered before. Tall, armored, and armed with deadly energy weapons, they moved with a precision that made even the most battle-hardened human soldiers hesitate. But there was no time to hesitate. The first blast of the new weapon tore through the air, a violent storm of gunfire that filled the streets with deafening noise. The alien soldiers turned, startled by the rapid, continuous fire. But it was too late. The weapon fired 3,000 rounds per minute, each shot hitting its target with deadly accuracy. The alien soldiers, who had once been feared for their strength and firepower, were struck down one by one. Their shields, powerful as they were, couldn't withstand the sheer volume of fire. It was like nothing they had ever faced before. The resistance soldiers pressed forward, using the chaos created by the new weapon to push through the alien ranks. With every burst of gunfire, their confidence grew. The aliens were retreating. They were stunned by the unexpected onslaught. The humans had found a weakness, and they weren't going to waste this opportunity. As they approached the massive alien ship, General Mason watched from the command center, his eyes fixed on the screen showing the operation. His heart raced, but there was a glimmer of hope. The weapon was working. It was doing what they had hoped it would do. The alien ship, once invulnerable to human attack, was now under siege. The resistance had reached their target. The alien ship loomed large in front of them, towering over the surrounding landscape. The ship's outer defenses were strong, but they weren't prepared for this new weapon. The resistance soldiers planted explosives along the ship's hull, strategically placing them in areas that would cause the most damage. They were quick, efficient, and relentless. The countdown began. They knew the aliens would soon realize what was happening and retaliate, but it was too late. The explosives detonated, and the ship erupted in a fiery explosion. The shockwave rattled the ground, and the alien ship, once the symbol of their dominance, was reduced to rubble. For the first time in days, the world heard something that wasn't the sound of destruction. Silence. The resistance had won their first victory. But this was just the beginning. They had taken down one ship, but there were thousands more. And the aliens wouldn't stay down for long. Humanity had struck back, but now the real war was about to begin. Humanity's first victory over the alien invaders was a momentary triumph, but the reality of the situation soon settled in. The resistance had struck one ship, and for a few fleeting hours, there was peace, a silence filled with the hushed whispers of people daring to hope. But deep down, everyone knew this battle was far from over. The alien forces were vast and relentless, and what had seemed like a victory was, in reality, just a beginning. As General Mason watched the aftermath of their strike on the alien ship, a sense of unease gnawed at him. The weapon had worked far better than expected, but its success came with an unsettling truth. The aliens were watching, learning, and adapting. It wasn't long before the first sign of retaliation came. The silence, which had felt like a breath of relief, was shattered by a loud rumble, an ominous vibration in the earth. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something to emerge from the chaos. And then it did. From the horizon, a massive fleet of alien ships appeared, more than anyone had anticipated. They were huge, their designs intimidating and unlike anything the humans had encountered. Their shields were now thicker, their weapons deadlier. The aliens had prepared for their own strike, and they weren't taking any chances. The resistance had only a handful of their new weapons left. They had no choice but to use them sparingly, knowing they couldn't afford to waste any ammunition. General Mason was quickly assembling his forces, rallying troops and scientists alike to come up with a new plan. But the reality was that they were still outnumbered, and their resources were limited. The alien ships advanced rapidly, deploying swarms of smaller craft to engage humanity's defenses. The human military scrambled to organize a counteroffensive, but the feeling of helplessness was palpable. Their victory had been a fluke, a brief moment of glory before the inevitable wave of alien wrath. Mason gathered his top officers in the command center. Their faces were grim, their eyes hollow from the weight of responsibility. They had only one goal now: survival. "We've got one chance," Mason said, his voice steady despite the rising pressure. "The new weapon works. We know that. But we need to hit them where it hurts, harder than before. We don't have the luxury of time. They needed to hit the aliens where their shield technology was weakest, where their defenses could not adapt as quickly. A small window of opportunity existed, if they could figure out how to exploit it. One of the engineers, Dr. Lena Carter, approached the group with a report in hand. Her brow was furrowed, her face pale from lack of sleep. She had been working tirelessly in the lab, trying to perfect the new weapon. Now she held in her hands a piece of new information. "I think I found something," she said, her voice laced with urgency. "A flaw in their shield system. We've seen it before. Their shields are powerful, but not impervious. If we can target their lower energy zones, we might be able to breach their defenses completely." Mason leaned in, listening intently. "And how do we exploit this flaw?" "We need to modify the weapon," Dr. Carter explained. "We've only been using it in its original form, but I believe we can upgrade it with a frequency modulation to match the alien shield resonance. It will disrupt their energy patterns and create a weakness. If we time it right, it will bring their shields down long enough to launch a devastating blow." It sounded like a long shot. Another gamble. But it was the only shot they had. The team worked through the night, making adjustments to the weapon and preparing for a new strike. The stakes were higher than ever. If they failed, humanity's last hope would be extinguished. The next day, with the alien fleet hovering above their planet, the humans launched their next attack. This time, they had a new weapon, one that had been carefully modified to take advantage of the alien shield weaknesses. The resistance fighters, armed with this upgraded weapon, set off to intercept the alien ships once again. As they approached the alien fleet, the tension was palpable. The soldiers had seen the power of the aliens firsthand, and now they were about to face the full force of their wrath. This time, there was no element of surprise. The aliens had already adjusted their tactics and were prepared for an all-out assault. But humanity wasn't backing down. General Mason, aboard the flagship of the Resistance, issued the orders. "Strike now," he commanded. "All units, hit their lower shield zones. Do not stop until they fall." The weapon hummed to life in the hands of the Resistance soldiers, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to echo across the battlefield. They unleashed a torrent of firepower, this time with the frequency modulation they had spent hours perfecting. The upgraded weapon hit the alien ships, sending ripples of energy through their shields. For the first time, the aliens' defenses faltered. The first alien ship began to wobble, its shields flickering as the new weapon's frequencies caused a cascade effect. The aliens attempted to adjust, but it was too late. The first ship was destroyed in a massive explosion. The second and third followed quickly, their shields unable to regenerate fast enough to withstand the human assault. However, just as humanity started to feel a glimmer of hope, something unexpected happened. A new wave of alien reinforcements arrived, larger ships, faster, and more powerful. They had adapted. The fight had only just begun, and the aliens were now more dangerous than ever. The battlefield was chaotic, with explosions lighting up the sky and ships falling one by one. The Resistance pushed forward, but it was clear that this was not a war they could win with weapons alone. They needed more strategy, more alliances, more strength. Humanity had struck a blow, but the war was far from over. The aliens would not rest until every last human was eradicated. Humanity's moment of victory was short-lived. The brief triumph of disabling the alien fleet with the newly upgraded weapon had come at a heavy cost. With their shields temporarily breached, the aliens had retaliated quickly, deploying reinforcements that outnumbered the human fleet by a wide margin. It was a brutal reminder that, despite humanity's ingenuity and resilience, they were still the underdogs in this war. General Mason stood at the command center, his eyes fixed on the tactical map. The once calm and confident lines representing human forces were now thin and scattered, fading as the massive alien fleet advanced. His fists were clenched, but his face remained a mask of determination. Every decision he made from here on out would be critical. One wrong move could cost them everything. "We're running out of time," Mason muttered under his breath, glancing at the soldiers around him. His mind was racing, filled with countless plans, each with its own risks. Humanity had one chance to turn the tide. But the aliens were ruthless, and their numbers were overwhelming. The alien fleet, now fully prepared for any resistance, had adopted an entirely new strategy, one that made their earlier attacks seem like mere skirmishes. They had adapted to humanity's new weapon, strengthening their shields even further, and had developed countermeasures that rendered the humans' previous success almost useless. It was as if they had been studying human tactics for years, learning from every engagement. Every weapon, every strategy, every weakness had been cataloged and exploited. The enemy was no longer just a faceless, chaotic force. It had evolved into a precise and calculating entity. The stakes were higher than ever, and the human resistance felt the weight of the world bearing down on them. "General, we've lost contact with the Western Coalition," a young officer reported, his voice tight with worry. "All units that attempted to engage the alien reinforcements have been wiped out." Mason didn't respond immediately. He knew the reality. They were stretched thin, with only a handful of units left. He couldn't afford to lose more soldiers, not when they were so close to turning the war in humanity's favor. The silence that followed was oppressive. Each soldier in the room knew what Mason had to decide next, and every decision felt heavier than the last. Time was running out. The alien fleet was closing in. Mason had seen death up close. He had witnessed the destruction of cities and the fall of entire nations, but nothing compared to what was coming now. He turned to Dr. Lena Carter, who had been working relentlessly with her team to enhance the weapon further. "Do we have any chance of developing something more powerful?" Mason asked. "Something that can break through their new shields?" Dr. Carter hesitated, wiping the sweat from her brow. Her face was pale, and the exhaustion was evident in her eyes. "It's possible, but it will take time. Time we don't have." Mason clenched his jaw. Time was something humanity couldn't afford. The alien forces were relentless, and their next attack could be the one that shattered their last line of defense. "We have to take a risk," Mason said, his voice cold and determined. "Prepare the prototype. We're going to launch everything we've got." Dr. Carter nodded, her fingers moving quickly over her console. She knew the gravity of the situation, and despite her doubts, she was ready to take the leap with Mason. The resistance had no choice but to bet everything on the new weapon. There was no retreat, no fallback plan. This was their final stand. The next few hours were filled with frenzied preparation. Soldiers and engineers worked around the clock, their hands moving in sync as they loaded the last of humanity's most powerful weapon into the launchers. The tension was palpable, each person acutely aware that they were embarking on a mission that could either save or doom them all. As the final launch sequence was initiated, Mason felt the weight of the moment. His team was ready. The weapon, a refined version of their previous technology, was now primed to strike a decisive blow. They had no idea whether it would succeed, but it was the only hope they had left. The sky above the battlefield seemed to darken as the human forces launched their final offensive. The weapon tore through the atmosphere like a comet, heading straight for the heart of the alien fleet. The aliens, caught off guard by the sudden assault, scrambled to adjust their defenses, but it was too late. The weapon hit its target with terrifying precision, sending a wave of energy that reverberated through the enemy ships. For a moment, everything was still. Then, a deafening explosion ripped through the alien fleet, the shockwave visible even from the distant command center. The blast sent alien ships tumbling from the sky, their shields flickering and failing. A cheer erupted among the human forces, but it was short-lived. They knew the battle wasn't over. The aliens were still coming. And they weren't backing down. General Mason watched as the remaining alien ships regrouped, their hulls glowing with an eerie light. The damage caused by the weapon was significant, but the aliens weren't defeated. Instead, they were more determined than ever to crush the human resistance. "We've hurt them, but they're still strong," Mason said to his officers. This won't be the end of them. We need to prepare for their next move. The room fell silent once more. Humanity had dealt a blow, but the war was far from over. The alien invaders would regroup, adapt, and strike again. The fight for survival had just entered its most critical phase. General Mason paced back and forth in the command center, his mind working in overdrive. The victory they had achieved with the prototype weapon had given humanity a fleeting glimpse of hope, but it had come at a price. The alien forces were regrouping, and now they were angrier, more determined, and more dangerous than before. Mason knew that this would be their final stand, the tipping point in a war that had already cost so much. The alien fleet, though battered, was far from broken. They had suffered considerable damage, but they still outnumbered the human forces by a massive margin. And now Mason's worst fear had become a reality. The aliens were adapting to their tactics faster than ever. They were learning from their losses and evolving in ways humanity had not anticipated. The screens before him flickered with the latest data. The alien fleet was converging on Earth, its massive ships now moving in a coordinated formation, much tighter than before. Their shields had regenerated, and their weapons were firing with deadly precision. Human forces had not been able to recover fully, and their own numbers had dwindled to the point where they could barely mount a defense. The overwhelming force of the alien invaders seemed unstoppable, and Mason could see it in the faces of his crew, the fear that had slowly crept into their hearts. "General, we've detected a new alien weapon," Lieutenant Hayes said, his voice tense. "It's unlike anything we've seen before. It's massive. It looks like they've built a weapon capable of decimating entire fleets in a single shot." Mason's heart skipped a beat. He had always known that the aliens were relentless, but to have a weapon of such power, it was the final piece of the puzzle that would crush the last of humanity's resistance. "We can't let them get close to Earth," Mason said, his voice grim. He turned to the tactical display, pointing at the oncoming alien fleet. "We've got one chance, one shot at stopping them before they reach our planet." His eyes scanned the room, meeting the faces of his team. The exhaustion in their eyes was undeniable, but there was also a fire, a spark of defiance. They had fought tooth and nail to survive, and they weren't going to give up now. The final battle would be their most difficult challenge yet, but if they were going to go down, they would do it fighting. "Prepare all remaining forces for a full offensive," Mason commanded. "We can't wait for the aliens to finish building their weapon. We strike now, or we're finished." The hum of activity in the command center intensified as human soldiers and engineers scrambled to prepare the remaining ships for battle. The ships were damaged, some barely functional, but they were all they had left. They didn't have time to repair them completely, but they could still be used for a desperate final assault. There was no fallback plan. There was no second chance. As the human ships prepared for battle, Mason turned to Dr. Lena Carter, the brilliant scientist who had spearheaded the development of their weapon. She had been working nonstop since the alien invasion began, and now she was the key to humanity's survival. "We need one more upgrade," Mason said. "We've seen how the aliens have adapted to our attacks. We need to hit them where it hurts, in ways they don't expect. Do you think you can help us do that?" Dr. Carter's face was drawn with fatigue, but there was a spark in her eyes. "We've only scratched the surface of what this weapon can do," she said, "but it's not going to be easy. If we're going to pull this off, we'll need every bit of remaining energy and power." Mason nodded. "I'm counting on you." As the weapons were reconfigured and the ships took position, the human fleet gathered for its final assault. The alien ships loomed on the horizon, their formidable weapons primed and ready. Humanity's forces were outgunned and outnumbered, but they still had one advantage: hope. It was the one thing the aliens couldn't destroy, no matter how powerful their weapons were. Humanity had hope in their hearts, and with that hope came an unbreakable will to survive. "Command, we're ready." A voice came over the comms, and Mason felt a surge of adrenaline course through him. "Then let's finish this," he replied, his voice steady despite the pressure. All ships engage the enemy. The human fleet launched itself into the fray, their weapons firing with a deafening roar as they slammed into the alien forces. The two fleets collided, the sound of battle ringing across the stars. It was chaos, ships twisting and turning, energy blasts lighting up the void, and the air vibrating with the sheer force of the fight. Every human ship that made it into the battlefield was a testament to their courage, to their unyielding spirit. The alien forces retaliated with fury, their weapons causing massive explosions as the human ships fought tooth and nail for every inch of space. For every alien ship that fell, two more took its place. But humanity's determination was unstoppable. They fought like never before, pouring all their remaining strength into their final push. Mason watched from the command center, his heart pounding as the battle raged on. They were giving it their all, and he couldn't ask for anything more. But deep down, he knew it was going to be close. The aliens were powerful, but humanity had something they didn't: resilience. And resilience, Mason believed, was the one thing that could win this war. The final weapon, the one humanity had hoped would turn the tide, was launched. It tore through the alien fleet like a comet, its blast radiating with devastating energy. The impact was cataclysmic. Alien ships exploded, their hulls disintegrating in a fiery glow. For a moment, it seemed as if the war was finally over. But the battle wasn't over yet. The aliens regrouped, their resolve hardening with each passing second. Humanity had dealt a blow, but the question remained: was it enough to win the war? The fate of the galaxy now hung in the balance. Would humanity's final stand end in victory, or would they be crushed under the weight of an unstoppable force? The answer would come in the next moments as the battle raged on.